Welcome back. The Level 1 Coach Podcast. Drew and Mikkel here. And today I think we're going to get into a conversation about trust. And where we're going to lead off is maybe not shocking if you know me, but there's a guy on Twitter named George McGill, goes by George Mac on Twitter. We'll link him in the show notes if you're unfamiliar. But George wrote a blog on what he's calling the trust spectrum. And to give you a little bit of context, and we will link this spectrum 0 to 10 in the show notes, but I'll try to give you this visual in words as best as I can. But essentially, George comes from the marketing field, and he's a guy that's looking to do things different and better and get away from the status quo in that field. If that sounds familiar to you, you're in the right spot. But anyway, he talks about that the conventional way to kind of go about, and if you listen to the marketing gurus on Twitter, they will give you these systems and teach you these courses on cold calling and on just sending 100 cold emails a day and a system around creating a funnel via cold emails and cold calls to attract potential clients to you. And he says you can go about it that way, but the asymmetrical upside bet and the different and better way to do it might just be to get a bit more like Taylor Swift or Harry Styles. So 0 on a scale on the trust spectrum is a cold call. 1 is a cold email. 2 is a boring paid ad. And then I will skip down to like 8, 9, and 10. And you can fill in the middle when you click the link in the show notes. So again, cold call, cold email, boring paid ad. That's 0, 1, and 2. And then you have 8, 9, and 10 are word of mouth from a friend, 3-hour podcast or book, and then 10 is Harry Styles or Taylor Swift on stage to paying fans. The best marketers know where you need to sit on the trust spectrum, and his kind of push is you are going to convert at like 1 or 2% over cold emails and just bashing your head and, quote, working hard. We've heard that in our industry. And the better time spent might be in creating a newsletter, creating a YouTube channel, getting yourself out there on social media, and building trust through value creation. Because he says what Taylor Swift has that a cold email doesn't is Taylor Swift can get on stage for a concert in Kansas City and subtly or on purposely mention Coca-Cola, and putting that in people's heads. Every convenience store within 6 miles of, let's say she plays the show in Kansas City, every convenience store is going to be out of Coca-Cola at the end of the show. They will go, and her fans will go scour the shelves and empty them because she has credibility stamp, she has trust, she has social programming, and people make basically an idol out of her. So she has so much trust as a 10 on that spectrum that she doesn't need to bash her head and send cold emails. She can simply speak words on stage in front of people at a concert, and there's automatic built-in trust. If you want me to unpack that a little more, I can. If not, I want to kick that to you, and you can take that wherever you want.
I think this is intuitive for most people to think about. Obviously, if you get a call from, let's say, your sibling that's like, hey, watch this documentary on Netflix or watch this show. You compare that to now you overhear some random person being like, oh, you should watch this show. Like you don't know that person, you know your sibling knows you, what you like, what you don't like. So it makes sense why, like you said, a phone recommendation from a friend or Taylor Swift, someone that people idolize, recommending something is better than a cold email. I think where what I like about where I actually didn't know his full name wasn't George Mack. So what I like about where he's going with this is we oftentimes, as you alluded to, recommend whether it's marketing gurus, people in the coaching industry, whatever, like you recommend just reach out, cold emails, cold calls, cold text. And where it goes for me is like most of the time when you get like a convert, in the marketing world, if you get a conversion on someone um, buying a product that you're hoping they would buy, in the our industry, it might be a player earning an opportunity at that next level or a coach earning an opportunity at that next level. Like a lot of times these come from either prior relationship trust that's already built or trust that is established with someone else, and that recommendation comes from that person. So I trust you and you recommend some player that you know. And so I don't know the kid, but I trust you. I watch him and I'm like, hey, Drew's right. Versus some random guy calls me and says, I have this player, you should watch him. I watch him. Maybe almost all other things are equal, but the biggest difference is that I trust you and I don't know this other guy. It doesn't mean I don't trust him, I just don't know him. So he's kind of got that cold call level too. Um, and so I think, like I said, in marketing, it makes sense, but where my mind goes is kind of like taking it into coaching and even just hockey in general and how these things apply to what on the face of it feels like a non-marketing world or a non-marketing industry, but human uh action, judgment, our beliefs. I mean, the marketing takes advantage of humans in that way. So even though it's not maybe the exact same as that, there are a lot of parallels to how this applies to, what we talk about or what we do.
Yeah, I think one way and where my brain jumps to right away, I've had a couple coaches that are struggling like I am, that resonate with the writing and stuff, and they've reached out, and I think it's really easy to like lose faith when you keep having interviews, getting chances, being introduced to people, and then they pick someone else, and it's not you, and it's not you, and it's not you, and it's not you. And I had one coach just straight up ask me, like, am I like, at what point do I start thinking that I'm a bad coach? And I'm like, never. I get why it's crossing your mind. I get that like the evidence is you keep getting passed over, but it's simply this spectrum. It's if my friend is applying for a job or in the mix with three other people, if the guy that's recommending my friend to the prospective coach that needs an opening, he only knows him at a 5, but one of the other candidates' buddies knows him at an 8 or a 9, then sure, you can sit down and do the Henry Ford thing like we talked about at the last episode, and like more power to you if you do that and you don't outsource your thinking to recommendations and you kind of want to figure it out for yourself. But I think in most cases, what's happening, and as much as we want to live in the world where everyone's doing the Henry Ford hiring, most people are just who's the highest person in my network on this trust spectrum, and I'm going to go to him for a recommendation. So, not that you're a bad coach if you're not getting picked. I mean, it might be, but in this case, like in the context with my friend, he's not a bad coach. He's just not high enough, or his buddy who's recommending him is not high enough on the trust spectrum for him to get the nod. Um, if you have thoughts on that.
It's a hard distinction to make, I think, because you as the applicant or you as the person on the outside don't know what's going on in that person who's hiring's mind or process. So for you, you internalize, you know, did I botch part of the interview? Did I not do I not have the experience? Am I just not good enough, like you said? This person's asked before, like, or in reality, those things all could be, it could be a little bit of everything. You may not have the perfect amount of experience they're looking for, or just the requisite amount. You may be a little bit different, not bad, but you may be a little bit different of a coach than what they want. Maybe you're a guy that, I don't know, has spent time at one level and they're looking for someone who's got experience at a different level. Who knows? Um, but it also could be, like you said, that your your connection to this job is a 5 and some other guy's connection to this job who ends up getting it is a 9. And at the end of the day, like there's a I think this gets into an interesting topic, which is a little bit nerdy science stuff, but like are you familiar with Jonathan Haidt happiness hypothesis, that author?
Familiar with the author? I don't think I've read that one, but go ahead.
I haven't read it either. He's got another one that I'm reading now, and I honestly can't even think of the name of it. It's something about the righteous person or the righteous mind, and it's about essentially gets into why humans are divided on topics like politics and religion, and why both sides think that morally they're correct or just, or more correct than the other side. And anyways, he's breaking down how we make decisions, and this reminds me of this exact thing because we think that, we see something, we make a decision on it, and afterwards then like we might break down like why we did it.
Mhm.
And his point is that in reality, humans make snap judgments on things they see or people they meet. It's just like a gut thing. Like you see the word evil and immediately you're kind of like, oh, disgusted. You see the word love and you're happy. You're like, oh yeah, that's a good thing. So you meet a person and without even recognizing that you're doing this, you make this snap judgment of like, I like them or don't like them. They remind me of love or hate. And then after the fact, you create a whole narrative as to why you liked them
Mhm.
or why you hated them. But in reality, almost 99, well, I shouldn't say 99, I shouldn't even get into numbers. But in reality, the majority of the time, we make snap judgments without realizing we're doing this. And then we build narratives afterwards.
Mhm.
And so he uses this analogy of the elephant and the rider. And the elephant is just here making all these snap judgments. And then the rider is like our mind that can control where we go. And the rider thinks he's controlling the elephant. The elephant thinks he's leading the rider. And in reality, there's this constant give and take, but really like the rider doesn't go somewhere unless the elephant wants to. And he gives this example of like if the elephant starts to lean to the left, the rider's job is to now guide him to the left. And sure, he could guide him to the right, but if he feels the elephant wanting to go to the left, he's going to go to the left. That's your snap judgment. So with this stuff, it's like I bring that all up because there are certain scenarios where you might do the Henry Ford and really extrapolate out and figure out why you want candidate A versus candidate B. There are also, I think, a lot of scenarios, more than we would, any of us would like to admit, where you look at a candidate, you look at a player, and you make this snap judgment. And man, is it hard to not have that judgment linger for months on end. And there's cliches out there of like always put your best foot forward or you never know who's watching. And as corny as they are, there's a level of truth to them because if you have one bad day as a player and a coach is there to watch you, or you as a coach to a fellow coach have, one, I don't want to say bad presentation, but you present poorly one time, like that could be all it takes to do you in because the way our minds work, as much as we may want to actively say that we're able to, you know, lead ourselves to the things we want to believe, we are humans. And as Height lays out, like humans are, you're subject to the way your judgmental mind works. So I didn't do a perfect job of explaining that, obviously, but I think the point I'm getting at is like there are a lot of things that happen beneath the surface at a level that we're not even necessarily conscious of that plays into why certain players get opportunities, certain coaches get opportunities. And it's honestly why it's important to, I think, to always try to be aware that like I don't want to say you're always being watched, but like there's constant opportunities that may not look like opportunities today. Kind of like what we got into the last podcast with just like players, not knowing exactly where, like you said, the coach may beat you to that level that you want to be at. Um, but yeah, I guess I came to mind as far as like how the brain works and how these processes are kind of in conjunction with that.
Yeah, a lot there. I took some notes. I'll hit on a couple points. The first thing is like the first thing that I wrote down as you were talking about, um, just like the snap judgments and then post rationalizing that later. Uh, I wrote two things next to each other. One was unlearn that, and then two is seek and you shall find, and they go together. So if you're looking and if you're making a snap judgment, if you go to watch a player and you're in the scouting process with that person and the snap judgment is I just watched his first shift and he turned a puck over and now he went back to the bench and he banged his stick on the side of the boards as he was getting off and now his head dropped. Seek and you shall find is if that's your first impression, you're now you're probably going to watch him for a couple more shifts, but that is going to be burned into your head and you're going to be only looking and only focusing on more times that he gives bad body language, more times that he might bang his stick, more times that he might turn a puck over or questionably make a decision that could have led to a turnover. So you'll just start focusing on that. And what we have to do, and going back to the last podcast, what we can learn from Henry Ford is you don't just interview a coach if you're trying to hire him in the office and sitting across a desk from him. What you do is you make sure that you get him into a restaurant, into a coffee shop, into the real world around people of low status, perceptual status, and you see how they act in the wild. And where I think that ties into unlearning the snap judgment, one, we have to be aware that we do it. So great. That was brought to our awareness in this podcast episode if you haven't read that book. So now you're aware of it. So what are you going to do to actively unlearn that, actively hit pause, and actively, when a first impression isn't great, give someone more space and more grace to right the ship? I'll kick that back to you.
Yeah. Um, that's probably the hard part is now knowing that you do some of this naturally as a person and how do you unlearn some of those techniques or I don't even know if it's necessarily that you need to unlearn, but you need to be conscious
Mm-hmm.
of them and then figure out when they're at play. So like I'll give a personal example that I thought of, and it gets into exactly what you were saying earlier with like speak and you shall find. Is that what you called it exactly? Sorry.
Seek.
Seek.
So if you're
Sorry.
looking for it,
Seek and you shall find. Like if I go into a game watching a kid in the recruiting process and I'm sitting there thinking like, well, the last time I saw him, his team got routed and he had horrible body language. If I now am watching him the second time around, even if he's playing well, his team is playing well, I'm thinking in my mind he has bad body language. So I'm looking to find that. And sure, I might tell myself like I want to see if he has it to figure out if that was a one-time thing or if it's just, you know, who he is all the time. But the fact that I'm even going into it with that mindset immediately deters my open mind that I could have. And it's really hard not to do because naturally, like, and I'm just speaking on the recruiting side of things because I just have more experience than the hiring. obviously, but like it's hard not to do because very rarely does someone not make an impression on you, good or bad, the first time you watch them. And also very rarely do you get a recommendation of a player without some background of like something about them. So you're naturally going in with not an open mind. And something that I tried really hard this year to do, actually to not do. I'm not sure that I did that well with it, but there's obviously certain programs, youth programs that have a little bit more pedigree than others. And although it's passing the time in between periods and it's theoretically providing good information, going to elite prospects on your phone or your iPad in the middle of a game and finding out that a kid on your team or a kid on the team you're watching played for, let's say, Honey Baked versus played for the California Golden Bears. Like it puts two different images in your mind. One is of a kid who came from a really good program growing up, and one is of a kid who played for a team I've never heard of until I looked that kid up. And it can honestly work in favor and against both kids. You could look at the kid from Honey Baked and be like, he must be good because he's played really high level. You could also look at him and say, well, if he's played such high level growing up, why is he now in this league where, a Division 3 coach is recruiting from? Because a lot of kids from Honey Baked are in OHL, USHL, whatever it might be. Um, and you could also look at the kid from California, good and bad too. You could say on the positive side of things, like, hey, this is a kid that played for an organization I've never heard of growing up, and now he's competing with kids from Honey Baked. That's not bad. He's probably he's done a lot to get here. You could also use it against him and be like, probably hasn't been coached that well, doesn't have that much pedigree. Like maybe he's not going to be the best kid because of where he came from. And the point of this is that like one way I've tried to actively undo some of those habits are to just not look and just watch the full game, see what you think of the kid across 3 periods. And then at the end, obviously you're going to look him up because you're going to talk to him. And even if I don't look him up, one of the first questions I ask is like, where'd you grow up? Where'd you play? Just honestly, not because I care, because I just want to make you, that's a way to make connections, not because I cared that you played for one team versus another. So anyway, like that's one way you can try to undo it. Like I said, it's hard not to do because it's just natural to want to look at more information and to think that that's going to help you make a better decision. But I'll kick it back to you because that was a long one.
Yeah, I think of two things. The one thing that I thought of at the beginning here, take like ways to slow it down or like give people more runway. Um, like a longer either hiring process or a longer recruiting process or just like more touches with it. But if you have like I was a quiet, weird kid that didn't have a lot of friends on hockey teams growing up. If you can imagine that. Probably not a shocker to some people. But anyway, like I wasn't great at making a first impression with a coach on a recruiting visit. Quiet, reserved, not secure in who I was as a 18, 19, 20-year-old kid. I wasn't going to ask the greatest questions. I wasn't going to be the best conversationalist. Um, had a lot of forced coaches growing up, so like wasn't super safe around prospective college coaches. So like I listened, I walked around on the visit. Um, but I don't think that coach probably left and said, wow, like Drew seems like a really personable, charismatic, nice kid. Um, he was probably like, I'm nervous if he's gonna fit in because he said like 3 words and one was hi and one was bye. Um, so I fit in another word. But anyway, the point of that is like if you have a kid that's not necessarily going to make a great first impression, like give him more than one. Um, Reach out to him, more conversations on the phone, try and find common touch points, try and get him to open up however you can. Maybe bring him on a second visit if that's feasible. Maybe get him around or on separate phone conversations with captains, leaders on the team, whatever. Um, because if that kid comes from an environment where he's never been that comfortable, um, by showering him in reasons to be comfortable, eventually, like you'll probably get that kid to open up, and then you'll be able to decide if he's going to be a good fit around the boys or not. Um, so it makes me think of that. And let me just kick that to you, and I can loop back to the other thing.
Yeah, well, the thing I would say that matters most with that is like being aware of, is the rest of your team also like that, or are they not? And there's not really a better or worse, but I would imagine if your whole team is like that, then maybe that's not gonna, yeah, everyone gets along, but no one's gonna speak, or we're not gonna have any, nothing will be accomplished because everyone's so similar. Like you need some diversity of thought and experience and attitude in that in that team environment. Same thing goes for coaches. Like if you're a head coach hiring an assistant, like, do you want someone who's just like you? I mean, that can work. I'm not saying it can't, but remember, like you're coaching a team where you're trying to provide a good experience for the players. So if you have three coaches, four coaches, and everyone is the exact same, the players are getting one thing all the time. If you have three or four coaches and everyone's a little bit different, everyone has a little bit different experience, background, diversity of thought, you might be providing a better experience for the players. Maybe not, but in theory, you could be providing a more well-rounded experience for the players. So I think considering like, okay, to use your example with your college recruiting, like, okay, Drew's quiet, he didn't say much. Is my whole team also quiet and not saying much? Maybe I want to bring in a kid who's a little different than what I already have. Maybe I want to bring in another kid because I know just like that because I know he'll fit in. But I think it goes back to what we talked about, like being intentional with what you're looking for and who you bring in. Um, so yeah, I have something else to say, but I'll kick it back to you before because I know you had another one.
Yeah, the other thing was just like more personal to me on like the elite prospects thing. Something that I do, I know you said you did it with players, which I think is huge, but like because, and this might be like a level one thing, um, but like coaches that will even follow me on Twitter, like I try to send them a DM without like looking like a cover my right eye so I don't see their bio because like I don't want to know where they coached. And then what I used to do and what everyone does is they EP someone first. Someone follows you on Twitter, you EP them, and then you like make this Jonathan Haidt split second judgment. Like I won't reach out to him because he's only coached in the USPHL. He can't do anything for me. And then that becomes before you've even read a blog, talked to the person, whatever, you've written somebody off. And to give you an example, again, personal one, I finally had a tweet that went out to more than like 100 people and it went out to like 14,000. And I checked the analytics on it at the end of its run. And there were 500 people that clicked on my profile. And I got like 3 Twitter followers out of it. And I think it's because of this like EP test that I fail in the hockey world. And um yeah, that's where my brain went with that part of what you said in your last take. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Just on the numbers, like we were talking last podcast on like 4 out of 1,000, and that those numbers almost match up as far as finding people that are gonna, provide value for you. I think where I want to go with it at least is like getting back to the idea of trust and how to build trust.
mhm.
Like what you were opening this all up with kind of like different ways that in the marketing world people can try to foster and facilitate trust. And I think um you talk about like where I talked about earlier, like having a personal connection, whether it's an 8 versus a 5, and like, well, you know, it might seem as though how do you get those personal connections? Like how do you become a person who's an eight, or how do you become even just a person who's a five when you're starting out? And I think for me, one of the biggest things that I tried to be in tune to, and we've talked about this before, just off air personally, is like I think one of the biggest things that leads to trust is having follow up and follow through. And if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. You're going to follow through on that. And it can be really simple. You've spoken before of like different types of shit tests to figure out if people are really who they say they are going to do the things they say they will. And I think with follow through, like that one to me is it's super simple to figure out if someone's really going to be in your corner and help you, because you you're asking them to help you out with something, or you're asking them for advice. And it can be as simple as your last example where Ryan Warshawski leaves his number in the Zoom chat, and you reach out to him and he follows up with you and is like, "Yep, let's jump on a phone call." Like immediately right there, he's following through on what he said he was going to do. Now, that doesn't mean that Ryan Warshawski is going to get you a job, give you a job. Not saying any of that, but that at least means that he's following through on his word, and there's potential that he is probably a guy that, whether it's for you or others, he can help them and he will help them. I think the important part is like a level one person, which I think that this applies to anyone, but for sure when you're starting out, you want to find those people who follow through on what they say they're going to do, and value those people above anyone else, regardless of credibility, where they are, what they've done, because they're time and time again going to try to help you and stick their neck out for you. The people that say they will and then you give them an opportunity to and they don't, or you ask if they can help and they don't, there's like such a big difference between saying like I'm going to help you out, I want to help you out, and following through on helping you out. And this applies to coaching and your players as well. But as it pertains specifically to this part of like how do you find that person who's an eight or that person who's a five? Like to me, it's looking for people that follow through on what they say they're going to do.
Yeah. What comes to mind right away is a story that happened multiple times when I was coaching in the USPHL. And sometimes the players would end up coming to us, and sometimes they wouldn't learn their lesson, even though they told me they learned the lesson, and then they'd go right back to someone else that was doing it. But like tier three recruiting is an absolute zoo if you've never done it. And there are coaches. There's this one kid we had, he was a goaltender named Jake, and we were recruiting Jake, and someone else in our division was recruiting Jake, and we always are upfront and honest, and we don't promise, hey, you're going to be our starting goalie. There's other ways to go about expressing interest, and we're just never, I don't believe in promising kids things in recruiting. Um, and the other place um, gave him the sugar high, gave him the instant gratification, put the parents at ease, hey, you're going to be my starting goalie. And then he got to that team, and he was the third string goalie on the team. And talk about like losing trust right away. And good on the kid. He didn't stick it out for longer than a month. And eventually we traded for him. And eventually he did become our starting goalie, although we wouldn't promise that to him. But that's a kid that's had to go through like a hard lesson, but learned it and righted the ship. And then we've had like other kids, and I don't know why this happens, but I don't know if there's a rule of thumb out there that goes around in the coaching world, but every time a kid from the Midwest goes out east to play junior hockey, it just somehow doesn't work out for the kid. I think the East Coast is like proud of their own boys and maybe gives them a chance first, whatever it is. I'm just pontificating. But there would be kids that are like, hey, we're interested in your team. We love what you have to say, but like, we're probably going to go play in the EHL. And then they'd say the team. And it would be a team that this has happened to us before. And kids have ended up being hurt, screwed, whatever. And we'd be like, hey, just like this might happen. Um, Keep it in the back of your mind. And kids would be like, Drew, exactly what you said was going to happen happened. And then the next year they would go play for a different team in that league. But um, just like a funny but tragic but funny story.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I think that happens all the time with just coaching and recruiting in general. And the best way I've ever heard this described is like you use an example of a goalie. Like say we're recruiting a goalie and we tell him this is a different coach, not someone that I've worked for, but that explained this. Like say we're recruiting a goalie and we really want him and I tell him that, hey, you come here, you're going to be our starting goalie. And then whatever it is, say that's February. School doesn't start till August, September. 9 months go by and we get on the ice. And this kid, he ends up coming here, obviously, but he didn't really do much over the summer. And in the meantime, some of our other goalies did. And now I told him he's going to be a starter. He's not starting the first game. In my mind as a coach, like he's not starting the first game because he didn't hold up his end of the bargain, which was coming in prepared and beating out the other guys that are on our roster. In his mind, he was told he's going to be the starter. He's not starting game one. Immediately, we've started this relationship off on a lie. And it was like a really interesting moment for me because I've always thought of like, I've always thought it's a precarious situation to get into when you start telling players like you're going to be our starter or you're going to be a first line center for us or a top D pair. Like I think in a lot of ways, and I'd imagine I've only worked in junior hockey 1 year and it was I wasn't by no means recruiting players. I joined in August, so I didn't do any of that. But I imagine it's a little bit more tricky in juniors because you're going there for just a year or two, so you do want to hear like I'm gonna play right away. But at the college level, like I don't I can honestly say in 4 years, I don't know that I've ever told a player like you'd be our starter if you came here, or you'd be our top power play D or first line winger if you come here. And like part of it is just like, I mean, I literally don't know if you would. Like I think you would. And what I always say to players is like, we wouldn't recruit you if we didn't think you could help us make us better. So first and foremost, we think you make us better. Two, we wouldn't recruit you if we didn't think that you could make an impact on our team right away, which is a way of saying like you could play here as a freshman. And then I always just focus on the opportunity. Like if we're graduating a year like last year, we graduated 5 defensemen. Like, hey, we're graduating 5D. Do the math. We have nine. Five are leaving. That means there's a ton of ice time to take if you come here. And you can do the same thing with, goalie, forward, whatever position. And I think like this is a little different, but what ends up happening is you attract the right type of people to the organization you're at. And so for you, like if this kid is leaving to go play juniors out east and not play for you, like it's perceptually it's a loss because he's a good player. And for us, like this happened, I mean, I can think of a specific person that this happened to for us this past year, where on paper, like this kid's a really good player and he's not playing for us next year. And it seems as though it's a loss. But the more time that's gone by, maybe it's my post rationalization of not getting him, but I really think like the more time that goes by, like he wanted to be told that he was going to be the man for us. And probably this kid for you, like he wanted to be told he was going to be the best player on your team. And that type of, I really don't want to use the word ego, but I think it is ego.
Uh-huh.
That type of ego probably wouldn't fit great with the style of coaching that you were offering, or what I believe our style of coaching to be now. So, sure, on paper, good player, missed opportunity. But when you get down in the weeds of like 4 years or for you a full season, 60 something games, like was that player really going to bring the output that you wanted? Maybe not, probably not, because what they needed is not what you offered. And So at the end of the day, it gets down to fit and finding the right people that fit what you're offering. And the more I've done this, the more I've found that you really do attract the right people by providing the right opportunity or using the right um, selling the right opportunity and not selling you're going to be my number one defenseman, but hey, there's a lot of opportunity here. You get kids that are hungry that want to prove they can take advantage of that opportunity versus the ones that want to be told you're the best player that's ever going to play at this school or in this program on this team.
Yeah, that's a way of kind of going back to what we were talking about in the middle. Like it's a way to intentionally pause and then like the phrase that comes to mind is either way you win. And when like you're looking for a job and you keep missing, like one of my buddies and like myself, like it's hard to sit out and like keep hearing no, keep hearing no, keep hearing no. But like what used to be post rationalization, which now I just think is truth, is that either way you win. Like there's a reason that when you're being yourself in an interview or on a phone call that people are turned off. And the fact that people are turned off is not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. And the same thing recruiting a player, like you articulated, and I don't need to restate that because I think you stated it pretty well. But it's like if if I'm not going to tell you certain things that you're just waiting to hear, then you're not fit for me. You're not my people anyway. So either way you win is kind of what I think about.
And I think the hardest part of this is that on the surface, all you have to go off of is like the stats in the current today. And so you look at it and you're like, I'll use the example you were giving. Like you look at this player that's not going to go play for you, that's going to go play out east, and you're like, I think based on his previous season, he would be a good player in our league. And I just lost him. He's not coming here. And what you don't have to go off of is like whatever other player that you got, what did he end up doing for you that season? And so for us, like we do the same thing. It's like you value certain leagues or certain teams, certain players from those leagues and teams because based on historical evidence or based on just what's happened in the past, they turn out to be good players at our level, in our conference, on our team, whatever it might be. And if you don't get them, you look at that as a loss. But what you don't always remember and realize is that there is a player that comes to your team instead. And now fast forward 4 years, and not fast forward, but ask me in 4 years if that other kid that we got instead was worth taking. And like it may not always be yes, but too often we're judging on such a short timeline. I'm gonna bring this up because this actually really bothered me. And when it was like a week ago, I saw this and it's a little different, but it was, and I honestly don't know what outlet put it out and where I saw it. But it was like winners and losers of the 2024 NHL draft. And I was like, oh my God, like how is this even possible to be doing
Yeah.
less than a month after the draft occurred
Yeah.
when not a single player has played an NHL game? And I do understand that like Macklin Celebrini, like 95% sure he's not going to bust. So I get like there's generational talent there. And like that's an easy one to be like the Sharks are winners off of that. I'll get behind that.
No kidding.
But, but when you get into like just the draft as a whole and there's 7 rounds and how uncertain all these things are, what I wanted, what I was thinking about and what I like would much rather see is can this same outlet, same writer, can you give me winners and losers of the 2014 NHL draft and the 2019 NHL draft? So give me 5 and 10 year analyses of those drafts and tell me who won those now,
Mhm.
10 years later. That would have so much more value. I'd almost guarantee the clicks aren't going to be as high because
Yeah.
no one wants to read about like I think Ekblad was 2014, maybe, I'm not sure. But like probably less people want to read about Ekblad right now because he's a known entity and like blah 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 blah. People would rather read about like Celebrini, Levshunov, like those are more interesting guys to read about. And I do understand that there's less known about them. And so part of it is like you're catering to what people want to read about, but to think that you could actually categorize, and I think this article was graded on like letters, so like A, B, B minus, C plus. Like to think that you could like slap a C plus on X organization, I mean, just that's bananas to me.
Yeah. The thing that makes me think of is like Sam Hinkie uses the term confidence intervals. It comes from mathematics, obviously, or maybe not so obvious. I'm not a big math guy, but he taught me that it comes from mathematics. But anyway, it would be hilarious if GMs, whether they would be or not, and like there's a ton of ego involved, so probably not. But if they could just be honest and give their like confidence interval and like you said, max like 95% confidence interval, that would fit perfectly. And but like after picks like 3, 4, and 5, and this is social programming for me that I can just go ahead and undo because it doesn't matter. But like after like they say like the fifth pick or the 15th pick, at some point like in the first round, everyone basically after that pick has an equal shot of making the league or not. Um, whether that's true or not, whatever. But like the point is, if GMs could sit there after and be like, how confident are we that pick 1, 2, and 3 are at least going to turn out? Like, give us the confidence interval. And like, I think a person like Sam Hinkie would almost to troll the industry could have done that live when he was coaching or not coaching, GMing with the Sixers. But I think that would be entertaining and probably enlightening with the fact that like some writer can be so sure, and whether it's for clicks or whatever the incentive structure is. But like, I bet your own GMs, if they're honest with themselves, are less sure than the sports writer that wrote the article. So,
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's
mhm,
the part I think that gets me the most is like there's really honestly nothing wrong with like the five GMs, the first five overall picks. Maybe you leave out San Jose because again, like Celebrini is generational, and I just think everyone knows that, or at least everyone's pretty confident in that. But right after that, go down the next four. Or like you said, get out of the top 15 and just go from 16 to 32 or whatever it is. Like that's fine. That's fine if you don't know who's going to pan out, how good they're going to be. Like I'll just this is now just coming back to me. Like I obviously live in Boston. Everyone's carving Boston, or at least everything I saw, for taking this kid Dean Letourneau, um, from St. Andrews College, and just because he plays prep school hockey in Canada, and we watch a lot of prep school hockey, I happen to have watched him a lot. Not that I am some friggin' all-knowing scout. Not saying that at all. I've
mhm,
just happened to see him and his team play. He's literally like 6'9" as a 17-year-old or 18-year-old. And it is true, things I've read on him, like sometimes he's dominant and sometimes he's just like hanging out. And it's like, whoa, man, like how did you go from being like 6'9" and the nastiest player on the ice to like 6'9" and I'm only noticing you because you're so big? He's 17.
mhm,
And who knows, or whatever, he's 18, sorry. Who knows what he'll do in the next 5 years?
mhm,
And if you're looking at like where to hedge your bets, I know size doesn't always pan out, but he's got a ton of actual skill and talent. He's not just a big kid that has no ability. Like, not a bad place to put a 25th, 26th overall pick on a kid who's massive with talent. And now let's see if he can figure out how to compete a little bit harder, how to be more consistent. Like some of those things can't be taught, won't be learned. He could be a bust as a result. But to sit here today and be like, you should have taken some other kid,
mhm,
how do you know? Like, he might turn out to be an excellent player because he recognizes that size isn't always going to be his differentiating factor, and he's got to build a little bit more consistency and compete into his game. And now we're sitting here 5 years from now, and he's top six center in the NHL. And it's like, wow, all these guys that said he was, horrible pick by Boston, what a waste. Like those kind of things I think are just what gets to me. And we've weaved into a bunch of different alleys now of things we're going down. But that's one of those things to me where when you're judging in real time off of something that really needs to be evaluated in 3 to 5 years, those grades are bogus. And I don't know that they should be really taken seriously because like you said, if GMs don't even know, and those guys have seemingly heard and watched everything regarding different players they're drafting, how can a writer know? How can a reporter know? How can I know? Um, I'm not claiming to know who deserves an A plus or a D minus. All I'm saying is that nobody deserves any grade right now and give a grade in 5 years.
For sure. That is truth. And we are in fact off the rails on this one, so we will wrap it up. I think I am tapped out of where to take that other than in 30 different directions. So we'll put a bow on that, and we will catch you guys next time. Share the show if you got value out of this one. We'll see you next time.